So Arne Rubinstein, thank you so much for joining us on the iyarn podcast.
Absolute pleasure, Lockie. Nice to be here with you, mate.
So how we like getting these check-ins started with the podcast is, can you share a bit of a quote for us?
Yes. Thinking about a quote, actually, by far my favourite quote at the moment is one that I learnt when I was at Harvard University, when I won a scholarship there to the business school. And it is that in crisis, there is an opportunity. And, not a question that we are in a crisis situation with the coronavirus, but there's also not a question that there are enormous opportunities and great thing for us to discuss today.
Fantastic. Great. That's you've really nailed that one. So something that we've been doing for a number of, the kind of really in the scheme of things, in the scheme of rites of passage, the short time we've known each other for the last couple of years, something that you've brought into my life, which I take into many other areas of my life, is this concept of a check-in. Do you mind, I think it's quite relevant now to do a bit of a check-in given the times, of yourself, and then maybe run through everyone through the kind of concept of a check-in?
Sure. So we're starting with the check-in, or you want to understand a check-in first? Sorry.
I'd like to, let's start off with the check-in.
All right. How about I start? So my check-in, well, I'm tempted to say I'm good, and I sort of am, but there's a lot of things going on at the moment. I have the 89 and 90-year-old mother and father who are locked down in Melbourne in their house, and so I'm very concerned about them. And I have my, one son in London and one son in Melbourne. So there's a lot going on there. I have no business at the moment because, schools and public speaking and all that stuff's completely gone. So I have no income and I have a team that I'm employing. That's one side of the check-in. And on the other side, I'm quite excited. And that's just the truth of it. I'm excited about the opportunities. I'm excited about the fact that, people all over the world are going to be at home looking for things to do, and what's going on, in my opinion, is a rite of passage. And so it's an incredible opportunity for us to really support and get our message out to a lot of people. And I'm excited about the freedom of kind of everything's up in the air at the moment. My check-in's kind of, I'm at both ends of the spectrum. And finally, I'd say I'm happy to be here with you, Lockie, and really enjoyed what you're doing and what we've done since we've known each other the last couple of years. So I'm looking forward to this interview.
Thanks, mate. Well, thank you for that. I guess for my check-in, I'm surprisingly am in that kind of similar phase. I think a lot of this work that we do with rite of passage, you do kind of look at into life is this macro picture of things. And so right now, I actually just sat in the sun for about 15 minutes before we had this chat. So I'm feeling quite energized. A bit of a daily practice for me has been making sure I'm stopping for at least 10 minutes in the middle of the day to breathe, and that's been serving me quite well. How I'm kind of holding up with all this in a weird way, the work that we're doing with iyarn is quite, it's getting a lot of traction, surprisingly. Well, not surprisingly, but it's very exciting. A lot of people actually realizing as they become more virtual, it's a way for them to check in with their community, their peers, and more with more intent and connect deeper. iyarn helps facilitate that. So in my world, it's actually been the busiest time for me ever with iyarn. So and that excites me a lot. So I'm feeling quite good, and also to have right now to have you on the phone, who's been a huge coach and teacher for me as my real main teacher over the last few years. Very exciting. I've been dreaming about this, opportunity to get, your story out there to my friends in the community and the podcast. So I'm really excited by this. So, cheers.
Thank you.
Groovy. So I was thinking, now we've kind of gone through that, it's quite, the way how we do a check-in is quite different in different scenarios, but just the other day you're doing it online, free on your social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, all of that, talking about, how to be a parent in crisis situations. And one of the posts I saw you put up yesterday was actually about, this concept of a check-in. For us, we do a lot of these at the camps we do, but you have quite a perfect little formula, a word, golden. Do you mind just running everyone through what that is?
Sure. Well, look, the whole aim of a check-in is that when you say to someone, how you going, rather than just saying good or fine or okay, we actually want to know how someone's genuinely going. And there's no more important time than that. And a lot of my work at the moment now is focused around families at home and families and the children, many of whom are, we've got anxious children, scared children, all sorts of things going on. And it's critical that we can actually check in on their well-being. And just with friends in general, I want to know how people are really going, not just, a throwaway line. So the idea of a check-in is to, honestly share what's going on for you. And there are different ways of doing this. So I put together a word that we use to really make sure that we cover a lot of the important bases of a check-in, and that's the word golden, Golden. The G just stands for how am I going overall? Am I going well? Am I going terribly? Golden. That's the G. The O is what have I been occupied with? What have I been doing? So, I've been at home, been setting up, been getting organized, all of that stuff. What have I liked in the last period of time? What's going well? Sharing about that. What's been difficult in the last period of time? And I mentioned about my parents in lockdown, everything like that. E stands for what am I excited about? What's coming up that I'm looking forward to doing? And the N is what do I need? What support do I need? What help do I need in my life at the moment? So if we follow the letters of the word golden, we end up having a pretty good check-in, I reckon.
Fantastic. Yeah, it was actually really powerful for me and my partner, before I walk, how you going? How's your day? And just kind of actually pulling it back to that and doing a check-in every evening to make sure we're truly kind of holding that space for each other. I love it so much.
Yeah.
So with that,
we're trying to actually create a culture. We're trying to create a culture, Lockie, where all over the place, whether we're family, whether we're just friends, whether we're relatives, when we meet each other, we genuinely check in, spend 5 minutes.
Sorry, we lost a bit of media here.
One of the things we're hoping to get becoming normal again.
Exactly. I love it. So I guess with that, let's internet's a little bit dodgy here. Here we go. So with that, what we might do is kind of go into your story, Arne Rubinstein, Dr. Arne Rubinstein. I think a lot of people out there may have read your book who are listening to this. I've certainly been sharing a lot of your work to a lot of my peers and mentors, but a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to hear your story around what kind of brought you into this meaningful, purposeful work of the Rite as founder and CEO of the Rite of Passage Institute. Do you mind giving everyone a bit of a run through of your story to date?
Sure. So I started my career as a doctor. Did a few years in family medicine as a general practitioner, and then I moved into emergency medicine and did nearly 20 years as an emergency medicine doctor. And I loved being a doctor in many ways. I think it's a noble profession, but I also saw a lot of issues, and I saw that often we were treating symptoms rather than the cause of things that were going on. And I saw many teenagers coming into my emergency department who had, seemingly consistently done similarly stupid things. And I somehow worked out that what they were actually doing was trying to find a way to initiate themselves and, prove that they were adults, men and women. And I got involved in some personal development work myself. And
well, wait, just just to give people a bit of, sorry, just to cut in there, just to give people a bit of an understanding around some of those risky things to really get it quite granular. Sure. What kind of men do?
Yeah. Well, I noticed some patterns. And the boys, if you could find something to do with wheels or speed or jumping off things that were high or over things, any of those sorts of things were highly appealing to boys, managing pain. And that sort of translated into me seeing many boys come in who'd, built a ramp for their bike or their scooter or their motorbike or their skateboard or anything. And as soon as they made the jump successfully, they'd go back and make it higher and higher until, the inevitable happened and it went wrong and they came and met me. Or just driving their cars as fast as they can, or getting in fights, or jumping off the roof of their house, or jumping out of trees into rivers. Any of those sorts of things seem to particularly appeal to young men, kind of facing their mortality and seeing how hard they could go at there. And with women, girls, what I saw more commonly these are generalizations, but the overall was that the girls would sort of go internally and then get into really unhealthy situations. So maybe they would drink too much and then go off with the wrong guy, or get in the car with the wrong person, or go to the wrong party, or and then end up in a bad situation. And interestingly, even though their inner voice was saying, "Don't do this. It's not a good idea," they would do it anyway. And so I noticed those patterns, and then when I started looking into rites of passage and discovered that Indigenous communities all over the world would in fact create rites of passage for their boys and their girls as a way of getting them across this period of time, so that they move from being boys and girls to being young men and young women with an important position in their community. And I was like, wow, we're not doing that. And we end up with, men and women who are still acting like children, and just really seeing how there were so many problems at every level that were resulting from our lack of rites of passage. And basically, I believe that life is a series of transformations, and it's like a staircase. And each step is to the next stage in your life. And that's important. And generally speaking, each of those steps would have been marked and acknowledged by a rite of passage. And when we don't even do the first fundamental one of supporting boys and girls to become young men and young women, we risk ending up with 30, 40, 50-year-olds who are still acting like children. And I work a lot with men, and we end up with a lot of 40-year-old men who still think they're the center of the universe and life is just about them, and can never be wrong, can never admit when they're wrong, don't take responsibility for their actions, and think that women are there for them and are their possessions, or they can just take what they want. And that's a really big problem. And just extending that, I really worry that we live in a world that's actually ruled by boys, and that there are many boys in extremely powerful positions in politics and in big business, and who are basically about taking what they can for themselves rather than seeing how much good and they can be and how much of a member of their community they can be.
Wow, thank you so much. I think that was a real great kind of capture of that story, that journey into. So you transitioned, you left, you saw that the rite of passage is essentially just a different form of healing from being a GP running the mbbs practice there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I still think I'm working as a doctor, but instead of working in, waiting until people get sick and working in a system that I struggled with, the work that we do in the rites of passage world is about prevention. And if we can work with teenagers and support them at that age, that actually makes a difference to the rest of their lives. And I actually saw that, very often the people who I was working with as adults, a lot of their issues actually came from when they were young and teenagers.
Right. So up until 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. So do you mind just giving everyone a bit of an update? Obviously, a lot of your work is face-to-face. That you in your traditional model has been face-to-face running camps. So just give everyone a bit of insight of some of the ways how you facilitate rite of passage work throughout the country.
Sure. Well, our first programs were rites of passage for fathers and sons, which we started back 25 years ago, and taking away groups of boys and their fathers and doing a ceremony, a 5-day program where the men would share their stories, and we figured that the way to pass on wisdom and knowledge to the boys is not to tell them how to live their lives, but to really let them hear our stories and our true stories, good and bad, and then let them make up their own decisions. So on these camps, the men would share their stories. We would create challenges for the boys. We get the boys to create a vision for how they want to be in the future as men. And then importantly, we recognize that each of the boys is different, and each of them has their own unique gifts and talents, their own genius and spirit. And that our role as elders is to identify what are those things that are in each of our children, what are their gifts, and how can we bring that out so that they can bring them into the community. So that was our first program, and that's been running for 25 years. And then we very much saw that there was just as important a need for girls. So we supported mother and daughter programs to happen. And then we started junior programs, overnight programs for 7 to 11-year-old boys or girls with their father or their mother, to not so much a rite of passage, but it was a parenting program and an introduction to the idea of a rite of passage, so that when they got older, the parents would understand the necessity of creating a rite of passage. And then somewhere along the line, about 15 years ago, we started running leadership training programs so that we could be training more facilitators, so that people could go out and create their own rites of passage in their own families or work or communities. And then we started doing a bit of work overseas. And in the last 10 years, I've run leadership programs and trainings in about 15 different countries. And there are rites of passage programs happening in about a total of 25 different countries around the world. And we think somewhere like 200,000 people have been through our programs. We've also set up programs in schools. And until 3 weeks ago, we were in about 50 schools in Australia. And then as of about 3 weeks ago, we've got no business and I'm kind of unemployed because we can't work in schools, we can't do public speaking, and we can't do our camps. But it also creates an amazing opportunity to take our work online. And we know that there are literally, 2 or 3 billion people now sitting at home. And, if we can find a way to support them to do something with their children and with each other that helps them move to the next stage in their lives, that is actually one of the great opportunities of this moment.
Exactly. And I think I love that, just seeing that resilient mindset, like, holy shit, really, everything's complete. Your whole life has been put upside down. But with that comes, this growth and opportunity for growth and these challenges
Absolutely.
do create that. And I think, just before we got online, we had a bit of discussion about, when should we upload this podcast? And I think the reality is we don't know where the world's going to be, where consciousness and headspace is going to be at in the end, maybe 2 weeks time. So I'm going to make a real effort to get this, because you had some statements like, who knows what's going to be, where the world's going to be like in, say the end of next month.
If we just look at,
yeah.
If we look at where we were at 2 or 3 weeks ago, my family and I were discussing whether we're still going to go overseas for work and, to visit relatives. And now that's just like a ridiculous concept. In fact, you can't even get out of Australia. And so with everything changing so rapidly, we really don't know what's going to happen. And, we do know that we're going to have a period of isolation, and hopefully that ends, but we don't know whether there's going to be social disruption. We don't know whether there's going to be economic meltdown. What we do know is that it's unknown, it's not in our control, and that there are many factors involved, and that this is an event that hasn't happened before in the modern world.
Correct. And so I think that kind of leads into this next point that I've been kind of dwelling on a fair bit, which is, we're actually kind of, I don't know, in the modern era, I guess maybe World War II probably was the last time where collectively, globally, everyone was challenged at the same point in time.
Correct. And that, my parents who were 89 and 90, they were alive during that period, but certainly, no one of our age.
Yeah, right. So I guess, shifting through, changing gears a little bit into, you've done a bit of the work you're doing now, and the impact it's having on a bunch of people in the community. What are some of the ways how you're, digitalizing this rite of passage? Because, this is traditionally for, forever, really, millennia. A lot of this rite of passage work has been done, in the person, where people maybe, for a bit of context, for some people, when you do a leadership training course, Arne takes you through and shows a few videos of different rite of passages that happen globally, from in the Philippines to South America, to Northern America, and even to Australia. So how do you see, and then when you take people through this, do you see how's this going to actually translate into digital space?
Yeah. So one of my things that I've been very interested in is to understand the academic side of what a rite of passage is, to see if there are, steps that happen in every rite of passage. And definitely there are. And in fact, it was recognized over 100 years ago that a rite of passage always has 3 stages. And the first is a separation from your everyday living situation. The second is a transformational process, which takes a period of time. And the third and final stage is a reintegration and return back into your community, but in a different way because you've transformed. So we are currently in Australia in the separation stage of a rite of passage. We're all separating from our normal lives of work and socializing and going out to restaurants and having an income. All of those things, that's all sort of falling away. And we're now moving into this transformation stage, which I call a container. You spend a period of time in that transformation stage. So we're moving into the container of, for many of us, our homes, where we'll be for, we don't know how long, anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 months, or longer. And then eventually we'll come back out again and we'll return and reintegrate into our communities. So that's the 3 stages of a rite of passage: a separation, a transformation, and a return. And not a question, that's actually happening at the moment. And then my specific work has been around what happens within that transformation stage and identifying that and then looking at how this also relates to what's happening at the moment for all of us.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. I loved, for me, the reason what really drew me to the Rite of Passage Institute was getting a bit of framework around experiences I was creating for some families that I was being a bit of a mentor for. Just give me 1 moment. I'm just going to pause here. I'm pausing it. Can you hear that background noise?
A little bit of phone, but not to any sort of issue degree, mate.
Okay. It's not.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, cool.
I wouldn't worry about it. Can you hear the lawnmower?
Okay. Yeah, there's a bunch of noise. This lady's just laughing.
No, I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, cool. Okay, that's fine. I'll start again. There we go. So yeah, I guess the thing that really drew me into the Rite of Passage work was the clarity around a framework. It gave me, as a non-long-term experience outdoor educator and experienced creator, so much clarity and confidence to go forth and create quite sophisticated experiences for an array of different clients throughout the country, ranging from family offices into Indigenous communities, and then even into schools and even into buxes. Just that simplicity of the formula that you've created. So a bit of context around so you research globally around the world to do that, and then with the Rite of Passage Institute, people come in and they do a leadership training, and then they can then take that teaching into their own world that they like, whether it's a school, whether it's a community group and a corporate organization. Is that how it kind of works?
Correct. So our aim is to educate people in the framework of a rite of passage and then support them in facilitation skills so that they can create their own program in their own way, in their own community.
Right. Okay. I love it. And so people can sign up to this program. I guess there are online options for them to do it currently. They can just go to your website.
They're about to be now.
Fantastic. So I guess
what a great thing. If we're at home and we've got time, why not learn, in more detail about what it is, about a rite of passage framework and how we can, really use that in a positive way.
100%. So I guess, the big thing for me, the rite of passage, Arne, I've shared this with you in the past. I did the leadership training and I had my own kind of awakening, personal things that came up for me. That was my challenge. And really one of the challenges was actually getting clarity around the vision, what I wanted to be, who I wanted to become, and getting clarity on that. And then next minute I met my gorgeous partner who I'm still with. And then actually iyarn was really something I've been thinking about a lot of. And I think iyarn came as a result of understanding a lot of the reintegration phase of these rite of passages. People have these heightened experiences. So, rite of passage could be attending a Tony Robbins, Date with Destiny, or Unleash the Power Within, all these big people who have, 10,000 people in an arena talking about change your life, change your mind, all these different things. But it's that reintegration. How do you actually take that teaching, that new insight, that new vision for your life, and then integrate it into your life? And I think, I felt there's a space there for, not just the Rite of Passage Institute, but more so, other collectively, people have heightened experiences. And then how do they check in repeatedly on this way of thinking, this heightened way of thinking, as we say, the staircase, with their peers? So they're brought along that journey of, they know something has died and they're the birth of something new, that new vision. And essentially that's what iyarn is doing. It allows people to connect in to that higher way of being, with both themselves and with others. Yeah.
Definitely. We always struggle to get the integration, that third stage when people come back. One of the big reasons is a rite of passage is supposed to be done within a community. So the whole community would know, for example, that the boys or the girls are going off to go through their rite of passage and will come back as young men and young women. And the whole community will be there when they do come back, and will therefore see the new young men and young women and will treat them as young men and young women. And, the shift will happen. What happens with us is we go and we do these amazing workshops. We come back, no one knows, no one cares. People don't actually want us to change. And so, if we're not careful, we sort of get pushed back into our old way of being. And that can be very distressing for people to have done something and then not be recognized or acknowledged for what you've done. So we need to find ways of not only letting the community know what's happened, but supporting the people who have been through the programs. And iyarn is a perfect way that we can connect up everyone who's been on a rite of passage and give them a way of checking in with each other and communicating with each other. And, it actually is ideally suited to what we're trying to create.
I think it's a nice little segue into into the wheel we've actually got here. Sorry, the reason why you can't see me right now is just because I'm actually looking at your wheel that you shared through to me. So you've got a bunch of different segments here. So the goal is, I'd love to have a bit of a conversation with you about this wheel. So you've chosen, I'll just see if I can, you've chosen, I think the maximum amount of segments. Well done.
I got really excited.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. So tell me about some of the strengths here. So I see children 8.5, nutrition 8.1. There are obviously some areas, you're up in Mullumbimby. Talk to me about that a bit.
Well, I have a very close relationship with my sons. So I'm happy about that. And, something good happens, they ring me, and we talk. They're 28 and 30, and we talk a lot. And, there are challenges, but I'm happy with the relationship. And I place a high priority on living in a healthy way. And so, yes, I am up in the Byron Bay area, and I live on 150 acres, and I'm very lucky I have access to good food. So those things scored well. But then at the same time, I can be very busy. So I've got a number of hobbies and things like my music that I want to do that I'm just not doing nearly enough of. And, my relationship, my partner lives in Sydney and I live up here, and we're both very busy. And so, we haven't been able to see each other enough. We created one of the opportunities actually here because she's come up to spend this time of isolation with me. So that's fantastic. But it was actually very interesting for me just going through the different elements of the wheel, and without thinking about it too much, just saying, look, this is where I'm at. And I'm happy to discuss any of the specifics if you'd like to.
Yeah, well, I maybe just before we wrap up, we'll wrap up soon. Is there any other one, after when we have these conversations about, being vulnerability is where the space for growth is, and a lot of that is like doing. So, are there any of these areas of your life that you feel like you're a bit challenged at the moment, and you're committing to in the short term or medium term to expanding?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm challenged in my career and my finances, I have to admit, because, I've always sort of taken it pretty close to the wind in that, whilst I do a lot of programs, it's never been a particularly financial lifestyle. So, I've managed to survive, but I haven't had a lot of I haven't had savings. I've always had a mortgage, and now with no income, in many ways, I'm really financially vulnerable. But I also feel like my career could go in all sorts of new directions, and that there are lots of opportunities. So, it's a kind of a mixed bag there, which is both scary. I like that it can be scary and exciting and vulnerable and full of opportunity at the same time.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. And I think, people will be sharing that sentiment a lot globally. I don't think you're alone in that. So a big part of, we're actually looking at doing a bit of a campaign in the coming weeks, where everyone's actually going to be sharing their will, and maybe tagging 3 people and committing to have a conversation, an iyarn with those 3 people, and committing to, supporting them through that journey from being wherever they're at, they challenge it, and growing up to another level. So I hope to get you involved with that.
Fantastic, Lockie. Thank you for having me on your Zoomcast, and I really look forward to seeing what you end up doing with all of this.
Mate, really appreciate you, and I just want to say a big thank you for all your guidance and coaching for me, but also 2 other people we've had on this podcast, Josh Fergus recently, and also Mike Dyson, have both been on this podcast. A lot of us have taught off you, and we've got a couple other practitioners who will be on the platform in the coming weeks as well. So thank you for having such a big impact.
Thanks, Lockie.